the last week in the Forgiving Challenge. And the Forgiving Challenge this week is a big churchy word called sanctification, right? This is a word that comes up like in your everyday life, right? Like sanctification. You're at Publix and you're like, how's your sanctification this week? It's going great. But it's a big, it just means making holy. And it's kind of, just an exercise in all of those things. But this sermon series was not what I was anticipating it being. This is something we've been doing for 3 years now, and it's pretty good. It's good about getting the church rallied around each other, but this one has caused some angst inside of me. So let me explain what I mean by that. The first week we talked about Jesus' scars, right? And we see that our salvation is all wrapped up in Jesus' scars. And the first week we see from John chapter 20, Jesus is alive. The disciples know the tomb is empty, but they're still scared. They're in the room with the doors locked, right? And suddenly Jesus appears, in full control of the creation, right? With his resurrected body, he appears in front of them and he tells them peace, right? And he says, see my scars. And that really brought me to an odd place. That brought me to scars. Jesus' body is resurrected. Why does he have scars? Because that's not how I envisioned it always, right? My body, when I get my resurrected body, I'm going to have such abs, right? It's just going to be abs for days. So much so that you can turn off the lights. They will be so bright they can just light up a room, right? That's going to be, it's going to be perfect, right? Why does Jesus have scars? And that brought me into some almost kind of existential kind of ideas going on for my own sake, because I started realizing something. That question of why did Jesus have scars? Because I started thinking about my own scars. How my shoulder hurts today because I crashed on a bicycle. My wrists sometimes hurt because I crashed on a bicycle. Those are my 2 surgeries, bicycles. But there's also scars that I have that wasn't from bicycles. Scars from what people have told me, scars from how I regret how I handled something and hurt someone, scars that all these things, and all those scars have made me who I am today. And I thought, and I went, if my resurrected body is devoid of all those scars, am I just a husk of who I really am? And I was like, why does Jesus have those scars? And it's is he saying that he wants all of me, that my resurrected body is scars and all those life lessons that I've taken, and they are just restored, forgiven, renewed, brought to freedom, right? In sanctification, that's in being made holy in all those scars. That's what we were talking about. And I was like, oh man, there it is. And seeing how he restores those scars. And as we talk about sanctification today, I look down and I've got a sermon written down here. It's right here. This is near the end of it. It's got highlights stuff on it. This stuff means it's important. I mean, look at this. This sermon's huge. Over there, all that stuff. And I'm not going to preach this. People are like, oh no. That's why the last service was so long. It wasn't because of that. So instead, when we're talking about sanctification, when we're talking about all of that, I want to talk about the best sermon that I've ever delivered. Now, some of you've liked some of the sermons that I've delivered, and you're like, oh yeah, that one, on July 22nd, 2016 or something like that. I wasn't even here then, but you know what I mean. That was the one. That was it. That's not, this sermon that I'm talking about was February 15th, 2015, a full year and a half before I showed up here. I delivered the best sermon that I've ever delivered. And it was at a youth camp. It was at a youth camp. So back when I was in Arkansas, I liked to hang out with the DCEs and the youth leaders and all that stuff. So we got together and we did like a youth weekend type of thing at Pettagene Lutheran Camp. Well, Lutheran camp at Pettagene Mountain in Arkansas. Tiny little Lutheran camp. It's got like 4 buildings on it, dining hall, gym, and 2 like bunks and some place where they house adults, right? Like over there. And we would do this every year. We would do this like youth outing, this youth retreat type of thing. And it was fun. And they looked at me and they're like, hey, Cris, why don't you preach on Sunday and you can also do communion with them? I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And so, and that went over pretty well. And I can tell you, there's 2 reasons why that was one of my best sermons. There's 2 reasons why I know why. Is one, it was a mess all around it. But the second reason is that I can pretty much anybody that was at that sermon, pretty much anybody that was there will come up to me, even though it's been 8.5 years later, they will come up to me and they will say the hook on that sermon. They'll come up to me and they'll say, hey, Cris, it's good to see you. Like a few years back, it was the LCMS convention was in Tampa. So I went over there just for kicks and giggles, like to see some people. And when I was over there, like people from Arkansas came to me and they're like, oh, hey, Cris, how you doing? But like 30 seconds into the conversation, they said the hook on the sermon. They said, I am Peter. You got to understand this weekend and how messed up it was. I experienced such coldness in there, not from people, from old man winter, right? Like such coldness in there. There was a night that all I brought, I thought that the heater would be functioning properly in our bunk bed that they put us in. And so I brought like a blanket and a sheet for the bunk bed, and I froze. And it was that froze so much so that I had to pee really bad. But it was so much worse just outside of my small blanket, And I was just like, it's just better to stay here and suffer type of thing. It's like, just call me Job, Like it's over there. And I made a vow to myself. I made a vow that day. I said, I will never be cold again. And I did 2 things to make sure that happened. I went to Cabela's on Monday after I got back, and I bought 2 of the nicest sleeping bags that you can buy at Cabela's. We still have them and never use them because the second thing is, a year and a half later, I was in South Florida, right? Never gonna be cold again. Like that's like all this like that's can't be having that. And so I sat there and like it was so cold over there, and it just freezing, and it woke up Sunday morning and it was so cold that Sunday morning. But you got to understand something about this sermon. It was a very Cris sermon, which here's what that means. I didn't write it at all before I got to the weekend, right? I was like, we'll figure it out on the day. And here's the problem with Pettagene. You can't get away from anybody. It's only those couple of buildings, and there are kids everywhere, right? And so I found like a closet to hide in to be able to write the sermon before dinner. And I'm sitting there writing, and I'm like, okay, this is all right. But I ran out of time, and I didn't have the ending done yet, right? I didn't have the ending done yet. And I was like, oh no, okay, all right. Well, it comes to Sunday morning, and I have a photograph of this event. So here is where this sermon happened. Notice the cheap plywood walls. Like, no, and what you can't see are 2 very important things going on here. Like, this is like a gym normally, and this gym had 3 big garage doors lining the sides of it, right? Like, but here's the problem. The camp couldn't afford the garage doors yet. So they are just holes with plastic stapled to the outside of it, right? That's all it is. This is over there. And then they had 4 of those propane jet engines that they put in places, where they turn that on and the thing's like billowing heat out of a propane thing, and it sounds like you're about to take off on a 747. It's just so it's freezing cold. We got 4 of those noisemakers in the background of it. Look at how cold it is. See this kid in this most Arkansas of camo hats here? He's got 2 jackets on. And the kid next to him's got like the giant puffy jacket on. You see that? And I'm supposed to say something meaningful and impactful to the 4 jet engine and all these kids freezing, right? And yet everybody will find me when they see me, and at some point in the conversation, they will say, I am Peter. A month and a half ago, after the birthday party, did you guys have fun at that birthday party? It was fun times, right? Yeah, that was good times. The birthday bash pizza party, it was just silly and all that good stuff, right? I got a call from a friend from Arkansas. I got a call. And this guy, he called me. I'm like, oh, why did he call me back? So I called him back after the pizza party was done, and I talked to him. And what you got to understand about this guy is that his life was destroyed by a certain group of people. That his way of life, his job, everything was taken away by people who just didn't consider his livelihood. It was the biggest injustice that I had seen in a very long time. And if you want to talk to me about it, come and I'll tell you all the nitty-gritty details of it. But when I heard what happened to this guy, I called like 9 of my friends just so that I could yell at somebody. Right? I was so angry at what happened to this guy. Now, he wasn't calling me. He was there that day. He wasn't calling me to tell me I am Peter. He was actually calling, and easy, everyone, easy. He was calling to see if I'd be interested in considering a call to his church in Arkansas. Easy, everybody. Easy. I get those phone calls like twice a month, okay? Easy. I gave him the spiel that I give to everybody else. I tell them that I made a vow that I would never be cold again, right? like that's not true. There's other reasons. People are like, don't say that. Yeah, you'll go to Alaska. Like that's But I gave him the whole spiel, and all that stuff, and we started talking about his life. We started talking about his life and like how everything had gone on in his life and how he has started now that it's been like a year since all that stuff happened. Like he's been starting to put his life back in order, that he was working at a stable job now and all those things. And we're talking about all this stuff, and he goes, it's pretty regularly. He goes, it's down to probably twice a week now that I just wake up angry. And in the midst of all of that, he goes, but I'm Peter. Because that sermon that was delivered in all of that mess, what it was about, and it's a pretty solid idea. Peter, in the Gospel of Mark, is just stupid constantly. Just is constantly saying the dumbest stuff and getting himself into problems, getting himself into trouble. And I was connecting that to all my stories of my friends growing up, right? Because you guys have good stories about your friends growing up, where they'd be like, one of my favorite stories is one of my best friends, super smart guy, just not smart right around the moments when this is happening, right? Like at the time I had this really old Dodge truck, and that truck, it's the door handle on it on the passenger side. You had to slam the door in order to shut it, right? Old truck, right? Old American vehicle. But if you pulled too hard, the handle would just be in your hand, right? So you had to like accelerate it as you closed it. So he and I were out and about doing things, and we were going down this road, and I realized I could hear the wind out. I was like, hey. after this turn, and we were coming up to a pretty sharp left-hand corner, I said, after this turn, open your door and shut it, right? Now, I've heard some complaints about me and my driving from some of the people in this room, right? So there's a rumor going around that I drive fast. All right? There's a rumor like that. However true that rumor is, that pales in comparison to what I was like when I was 18 years old. All right? And I was driving this old 85 Dodge Ram with a 4 on the floor and a slant 6 within an inch of its body the whole time, right? So I went barreling into that corner, and my friend opens the door in the middle of that left-hand corner. Immediately, like, his body is flung out. I think I'm witnessing the death of my friend, you know? I'm like, ah! Like, over there, he had a seatbelt on, but he ended up getting his foot wedged into the front of the seat, the footwell, and there was like a crease on the dash, and somehow he got a death grip on the crease on the dash, and he's like, and his leather leg is hanging outside, and I'm like, ah! And he's screaming, ah! You know, like, over there, and I was able to, like, turn it back and, like, throw him into the car, and the door closed. I'm like, what are you doing? I said, after, you know, like, over there. Like, and Peter did so many things like that too. There's a story in Mark about the transfiguration. The transfiguration is where Jesus takes a couple of his boys, Peter and another disciple, up to the top of this mountain, and heaven cracks open in the front, and the glory of God just comes sheeting out of heaven, and God said, this is my son in whom I'm well pleased. And Jesus becomes all bright and shiny. You know, like my resurrection abs, you know? He becomes all bright and shiny and all that. And then Moses and Elijah, oh my goodness, it's like Taylor Swift showing up at your movie theater watching the Aerosmith movie, right? Like, it's like Moses and Elijah show up on either side of it, and Peter is just fanning himself. He doesn't know what to do, right? And he looks at Jesus. He's like, Rabbi, it's so good for us to be here. Oh my goodness. And he's like, I cannot handle. Here's what we need to do. We need to build 3 churches. 3 small churches, like one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And then the author of Mark adds a little note, and he says, Peter's being stupid here. Don't get any ideas, right? He didn't know what he was talking about because he was afraid, right? Don't get any ideas. Like, that's like over there. And that's what the sermon was all these things, until I got to the part where Peter was denying Jesus. And I'm telling this to this group of kids. And the kids, you know, like, they're right there, they're laughing at the stories, they're doing all these things, and I get to the part where denying Jesus, and I begin to notice the direction that I'm going in my sermon, and I went, if I keep going this way, I'm going to be Jesus in this sermon, and that's not where I need to be. And then something happened. Like, I can't say this happened then, but as I kind of think back at it, it's almost like, remember how Jesus appeared to the disciples in that locked room? And he breathes on them. And he says, look at my scars. It's almost like Peter appeared up there. And he said, look at my scars. And I saw how those scars of Peter, with the times when it said, Peter didn't even know what he was talking about. That he was up there and his scars were knit to Jesus. And I began to see how his scars were knit to myself. Knit to my own insecurities and my own foibles. And I remember, I did not have this sermon written. And I went, as I was talking about denying, I began to say, but I don't talk to a lot of those friends anymore. Because I started to get tired of them. because I knew they needed me for something, and I got tired of me needing to bail them out, them needing me for all these different things. And so when they would call, I would just, that's not what was happening. It's like swipe, you know? Like I wouldn't answer the phone calls. I wouldn't offer the assistance anymore. And I looked around and they needed me. And I said, it's almost like I was denying Christ himself. And I said, the truth is I'm not Jesus in this story. I'm Peter. I'm Peter. That all those things, I just didn't know what to do. And that's all I could think of as I read the gospel lesson for today. That Jesus is confronting, like Peter with those 3 denials. Like, do you love me? Do you love me? And he gets to the third one. He's like, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter's hurt. Most understated word in the whole Bible, I think. Because Jesus asked him a third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus says, feed my sheep. And we always stop reading there, right? Like, oh, feed my sheep. Yes, bad, But it keeps going. And Jesus says, very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you got to do whatever you wanted. You got to go wherever you wanted, but when you are old, your hands are going to be stretched out, and when someone else will dress you and lead you to where you do not want to go. And Jesus said this to indicate by the death by which Peter would glorify God. And then Jesus said to him, follow me. And we know what that death that was. Peter ended up being crucified like Jesus. The tradition is that he requested it to be upside down. But there's another tradition that I'm more interested in. That other tradition that I'm more interested in is the authorship of the Gospel of Mark. And we know that John Mark wrote Mark, but the church tradition about the authorship of Mark is that it's Peter's gospel. It's Peter's story of how he wanted you to know the love of Jesus. And that same guy who was running away, that he denied Jesus, ran away, he tried to go back to fishing and go back all those things. When Jesus said and blessed him and restored him and sent him forward, he began to see a new way to notice his own scars and foibles and hurts. When he wanted to tell the story of Jesus, it wasn't one of triumph over all that, but it's Peter's own insecurities and hurts and pains that brought him forth there. And what I see is that the freedom of Peter now is one that he is no longer running and hiding, but he is letting his sins and scars stand there for everyone to see. He's letting them be bared in front of everyone so that me, a month ago, talking to my friend on the phone, whose life was completely destroyed, that people told him he was worthless and needed to get out and just all that stuff, because Peter decided to show his scars. When we were talking about how angry he gets when he wakes up in the morning, he said, but I am Peter. I'm Peter. My story is about preaching because I'm a preacher. It's what I love doing. A little narcissist like that. That's my scar I'm working on. You guys all have beautiful scars in your lives. Hurts and pains that no one else understands. But your neighbors, the people driving down the streets, they're going to have very similar ones. And as you go forward in your life now, in sanctification, when Jesus says, follow me, We take up our cross, those scars and pains that have been forgiven by Jesus, and we let them knit together with the pains of others so that we and them may see freedom. And at the end of the day, I think that is good news. Please stand for the prayer for the sermon. May God bless and keep all your scars. May He hold you tight in those moments of difficulty. May He give you strength as He exposes those hurts and pains and those insecurities. And may you go forward here, following Jesus into the cross, through it, and into the resurrection on the other side, that you may bring that freedom of Jesus' scars, of Peter's scars, and your own to everyone you meet. May you be blessed. In Jesus' name, amen.